They have worn crowns of gold, walked the halls of power, and stood at the center of triumphs and tragedies that shaped a nation. The queens of England, some born to rule, others thrust into history by marriage or fate, have left an indelible mark on the country's story. Their lives were never solely about splendor or ceremony. They were about power wielded subtly, loyalties tested, and identities forged in the crucible of public duty. From medieval consorts to modern monarchs, the journey of England's queens is not just a tale of royalty, it is a mirror reflecting the evolving heart of the nation itself. The lives of England's queens form an intricate and fascinating timeline that reflects the changing tides of the nation's political, religious, and cultural history. This work aims to present a chronological account of queens from the early medieval period to the present day, not merely as royal wives or figureheads, but as key actors and sometimes decisive agents in the story of England. Each queen, whether she ruled in her own right or stood beside a king, helped shape the monarchy and often the wider social and political landscape of her time. Their lives offer a window into the workings of court politics, international diplomacy, gender roles, and the evolving identity of the English and later British nation. Queens have occupied a uniquely visible yet often underappreciated role in English history. While kings are traditionally remembered for wars, conquests, or legislative reform, queens are too often reduced to their familial or ceremonial roles. This perspective, however, fails to capture the deep influence many queens wielded, whether through direct governance or subtle manipulation of court dynamics and succession politics. From early medieval queens who brought Christianity to Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, to later queens who ruled empires in their own right, their impact is impossible to ignore. Even when constrained by the expectations of their gender or the structures of patriarchal power, many queens found ways to exert authority, whether through diplomacy, patronage, or religious engagement. To better understand these figures, it's important to distinguish between different types of queens. A queen regnant is a female monarch who rules in her own right. She inherits the throne and exercises sovereign power, much like any male king would. England has had several queens regnant, including Mary I, Elizabeth I, Mary II, and Elizabeth II. These women ruled not as consorts, but as sovereign heads of state. In contrast, a queen consort is the wife of a reigning king. Although she does not possess constitutional authority, her influence can be significant, particularly in shaping royal households, public image, and sometimes even policy through private counsel. Queens consort like Catherine of Aragon, Henrietta Maria, and Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz illustrate the power that could be wielded behind the throne. A third category, the Queen Dowager, refers to a queen consort who survives her husband. Though she no longer holds the position of queen consort, she may retain influence, particularly in matters of succession or royal patronage. Some, like Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, became beloved national figures long after their husbands' reigns ended. Several recurring themes emerge when examining the lives of queens. Power is the first and perhaps most complex. Queens often had to navigate a fine line between expected submission and real influence. Some wielded overt authority, particularly those who were regnants or regents. Others operated through networks, alliances, and strategic marriages. Marriage itself was not just a personal matter, it was a diplomatic tool, often designed to cement alliances between rival nations or dynasties. A queen's marriage could signal peace, provoke war, or determine the religious direction of the realm. Diplomacy was thus central to many queens' roles. Even those who were not actively engaged in statecraft were often expected to serve as cultural and political bridges between England and their countries of origin. Motherhood was another crucial dimension. Queens were valued not just as wives, but as bearers of future kings and queens. Their fertility, or lack thereof, could become a matter of national anxiety. A queen who failed to produce an heir might be repudiated or sidelined, while one who gave birth to a large and healthy family could secure a dynasty. Yet the emotional toll of repeated pregnancies, miscarriages, and infant deaths is a recurring tragedy in royal history. Finally, religion often shaped both the queen's life and her legacy. Some queens were central to the religious direction of the country, such as Mary I's return to Catholicism or Elizabeth I's Protestant settlement. Others were defined by their personal piety or religious patronage. Their religious affiliation could be a source of unity or division, admiration or hostility, depending on the prevailing mood of the time. To build this timeline, a range of historical sources and scholarly methodologies have been consulted. Primary sources such as royal charters, letters, portraits, chronicles, and state papers provide first-hand insights into how queens lived, ruled, and were perceived. These are supplemented by secondary sources, biographies, historical analyses, and academic studies that offer interpretations of the available evidence. However, it's important to note that the historical record is often skewed by the perspectives of male chroniclers or shaped by political propaganda. Queens have been variously praised, vilified, or sanitized to suit the needs of the writers and rulers of their time. As such, part of this work involves carefully navigating those biases to reconstruct a fuller, more balanced picture of each queen's life and legacy. Rather than offering hagiography or condemnation, this project aims for nuance. It does not seek to simply glorify queens as paragons of virtue or vilify them as meddling wives. Instead, it attempts to understand them within the context of their time, recognizing the constraints they faced and the strategies they used to exert influence. Each queen's story is told with attention to both public and private life, from court ceremonies and political crises to personal tragedies and triumphs. Early queens, from the Dark Ages to the Norman Conquest. Between roughly 500 and 1066, a period often referred to as the Dark Ages or early medieval England, the role of queens began to take shape amidst political instability, foreign invasions, and the gradual Christianization of the British Isles. During this era, queens were not yet the sovereign rulers that later generations would see. Instead, they were primarily queen consorts, married to kings for dynastic or diplomatic reasons. Yet their influence, though subtle and often unrecorded by male chroniclers, was far from insignificant. In fact, some early queens played essential roles in shaping England's religious identity, forging international alliances, and navigating the harsh warrior culture that defined their world. Two queens in particular, Bertha of Kent and Emma of Normandy, stand out as emblematic figures from this formative time, representing different ends of the period and demonstrating how royal women could act as conduits of culture, religion, and power. Bertha of Kent, a Frankish princess, came to England around the end of the 6th century when she married Ethelbert, the pagan king of Kent. Her marriage, likely arranged for diplomatic and dynastic purposes, was part of a long-standing pattern of alliances between the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and the powerful realms of continental Europe, especially the Frankish domains. What set Bertha apart was not just her royal blood or her position as consort, but her religion. As a Christian, she brought with her not only her own faith, but also a bishop, Liudhard, to serve her household chapel in Canterbury. Her presence at court helped prepare the ground for the missionary work of Augustine of Canterbury, who arrived in 597 to convert the Anglo-Saxons. Bertha's quiet yet profound influence was instrumental in Ethelbert's eventual conversion to Christianity, a pivotal event that helped establish the faith in southern England and laid the foundation for its broader spread across the island. Bertha's story highlights how queens in this era could act as religious and cultural ambassadors. Their marriages were more than personal unions. They were symbolic gestures that brought with them not only political alliances, but also cross-cultural exchanges. Christianity's growth in Anglo-Saxon England often came through the conduit of queens. As foreign princesses married into pagan or semi-Christian courts, they carried with them not just belief systems, but also ecclesiastical networks, religious artifacts, and the authority of the Roman Church. These women were sometimes the first to build chapels, support monks, or sponsor the copying of religious texts in their adopted kingdoms. In a male-dominated warrior society, religion offered queens a sphere of influence that extended beyond the domestic realm, allowing them to shape policy indirectly through spiritual persuasion. Fast forward several centuries to the 11th century, and we find Emma of Normandy, a queen who epitomizes the growing political complexity of England on the eve of the Norman conquest. Emma's life was extraordinary, not least because she married two successive kings of England, Athelred the Unready, an Anglo-Saxon monarch, and later Knut the Great, a Danish conqueror. Through these marriages, Emma moved between two vastly different political worlds and played a critical role in attempting to stabilize the kingdom amid foreign invasion and dynastic struggle. As the wife of Athelred, Emma was brought over from Normandy to strengthen ties between the English court and her homeland across the Channel. The Norman dukes were becoming increasingly important players in European politics, and this marriage was meant to fortify England's western flank against threats from Scandinavia. However, Ethelred's reign was marked by repeated Viking incursions and internal weakness. After his death, Emma married Knut, the Danish warrior king who conquered England in 1016. This second marriage was not just a matter of personal survival, it was a calculated political move. It helped legitimize Knut's rule in the eyes of his new Anglo-Saxon subjects, and Emma served as a crucial bridge between the old and new regimes. Unlike earlier queens, Emma left a more tangible historical footprint. She commissioned the Encomium Emmae Reginae, a Latin text that presents her version of events and seeks to justify her actions and those of her sons. This rare glimpse into a queen's own voice shows how she actively curated her legacy and attempted to influence political narratives. Through her children, particularly Edward the Confessor, who would eventually ascend the throne, Emma became a key figure in shaping the next generation of English monarchy. Her life demonstrates how queens could navigate the brutal world of conquest and succession with a shrewd understanding of power and allegiance. Both Bertha and Emma show how queenship in this early period was deeply tied to broader political and religious transformations. Queens were often pawns in the games of kings and princes, moved across borders to cement treaties or produce heirs. But they could also become powerful players in their own right. Through their marriages, they connected England to powerful dynasties in Francia, Normandy, and Scandinavia. These cross-channel alliances shaped the very fabric of English politics and opened the door to cultural exchanges that would eventually culminate in the Norman conquest. It is essential to remember that these queens lived in a warrior society. Anglo-Saxon and early medieval England was a place of shifting loyalties, bloody feuds, and near-constant threats from Viking raiders and rival kingdoms. In this context, the queen's courtly role often involved maintaining dynastic continuity, safeguarding succession, and sometimes even acting as regents or guardians in times of crisis. Their influence was usually wielded behind the scenes through counsel, religious patronage, or strategic marriage alliances, but it was nonetheless real and consequential. Though they rarely led armies or passed laws, their presence shaped the court and sometimes the kingdom. Moreover, the Christian ideal of queenship began to evolve during this time. A good queen was expected to be pious, chaste, generous, and supportive of the church. Yet many also had to be politically astute, able to maneuver in treacherous environments. The church's growing influence in defining moral and social norms meant that queens often served as moral exemplars, sponsoring monasteries, endowing churches, and nurturing the Christian identity of the realm. In some cases, they became sanctified after death. Bertha, for example, was later venerated for her role in England's conversion. Thus, the period between 500 and 1066 marks the emergence of queenship as a vital component of English monarchy. It was a time when queens began to exercise influence not merely as royal wives, but as cultural and religious mediators in a world still finding its political and spiritual identity. Their legacies were often written by others, monks, chroniclers, and kings, but their actions had lasting consequences. From Bertha's quiet Christian mission in Kent to Emma's commanding presence in the chaos of conquest, these early queens laid the groundwork for what the institution of queenship would become in England's long and complex history. The Norman and Plantagenet era. Between 1066 and 1485, England witnessed profound transformations in governance, culture, warfare, and dynastic politics. This was the age of the Norman and Plantagenet kings, a lineage that began with conquest and ended with civil war. Through it all, the Queen's consort of England played pivotal roles in shaping the monarchy, influencing culture, and in some cases, directly engaging in the brutal game of power that defined the medieval period. Unlike the often subtle religious influence of their predecessors in the Anglo-Saxon world, these queens operated in a more visibly political arena. The queens of this age were not merely passive figures. They were regents, patrons, military leaders, and diplomats. 5 women: Matilda of Flanders, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabella of France, Philippa of Hainaut, and Margaret of Anjou, stand out as exemplars of queenship during this period. Each of them shaped her era in distinctive ways, leaving behind legacies that deeply influenced England's monarchy and historical memory. Matilda of Flanders, the wife of William the Conqueror, became the first Norman queen of England after the 1066 conquest. She came from one of the most powerful noble families in Europe, and her marriage to William, Duke of Normandy, was a strategic alliance that helped secure his power in France. But Matilda was much more than a political bride. She ruled Normandy in William's absence and was considered his co-ruler in many respects. Her ability to maintain order in Normandy while William was across the Channel asserting his claim to England was a testament to her competence and authority. Contemporaries described her as intelligent, pious, and dignified, qualities that helped legitimize William's new regime to a suspicious English populace. Matilda also played a critical role in establishing the image of the new Norman monarchy. She was a significant patron of the church and the arts, believed by some to have commissioned the famous Bayeux Tapestry, which narrates the conquest in dramatic visual form. Although the origins of the tapestry remain debated, it reflects the values of the new regime and celebrates the dynasty she helped create. As queen, she set precedents for royal patronage and the cultural legitimacy of the new Norman rulers. Her position as mother to 10 children, among them King William II Rufus and King Henry I, placed her at the center of the succession. Her influence over her children was both personal and political, guiding them through the complex task of maintaining control over both England and Normandy. A century later, Eleanor of Aquitaine would dramatically reshape the role of queenship in England. Eleanor was a woman of immense wealth, political power, and charisma, having first been Queen of France before marrying Henry II of England. Through her vast inheritance, she brought the rich and cultured lands of Aquitaine into the English crown's possession, significantly expanding its influence in France. Eleanor's marriage to Henry produced a brood of future monarchs and nobles, including Richard the Lionheart and King John. Yet her influence extended far beyond childbearing. She was a political force in her own right, engaging in statecraft, diplomacy, and even rebellion. Eleanor's role in the Second Crusade alongside her first husband, Louis VII of France, marked one of the rare instances of a queen physically accompanying a military expedition across continents. While the crusade was ultimately a failure, her presence symbolized the active participation of royal women in martial and religious enterprises. After marrying Henry, she continued to exert political influence, though their marriage was marked by conflict. At one point, Eleanor supported her sons in a rebellion against their father, an act that led to her imprisonment for over 15 years. Yet even during captivity, her presence loomed large in courtly culture and politics. Upon Henry's death, she was released and immediately assumed a central role in securing her son Richard's succession. During his absence on crusade, Eleanor governed as regent, showcasing her administrative acumen and political gravitas. Her patronage of troubadours and poets also helped foster a cultural renaissance in court life, leaving a lasting imprint on the values and aesthetics of European aristocracy. In contrast to Eleanor's regal glory, Isabella of France is remembered with a darker, more controversial legacy. As the wife of Edward II, Isabella arrived in England as part of a diplomatic alliance with the French crown. Initially perceived as a modest and dutiful queen, her life took a dramatic turn due to her husband's favoritism toward certain courtiers, most notoriously Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger. These relationships, viewed as damaging and scandalous, alienated Isabella and undermined her position at court. Eventually, Isabella fled to France under the pretext of a diplomatic mission and began plotting against Edward. She formed a partnership with the English exile Roger Mortimer and returned to England with an army, launching what would become one of the most sensational political upheavals of the medieval period. In 1327, Edward II was deposed in favor of his and Isabella's son, Edward III. Though she never officially ruled as monarch, Isabella was effectively regent for several years, governing the kingdom alongside Mortimer. During this time, she exercised considerable power and influence, but the partnership with Mortimer grew increasingly unpopular. When Edward III came of age, he orchestrated Mortimer's execution and confined his mother to political obscurity. Despite her fall from grace, Isabella's boldness in confronting a reigning king, her own husband, was unprecedented. Her actions earned her the moniker, the She-Wolf of France, reflecting both her ferocity and the enduring fear of female authority in a patriarchal world. Yet her story underscores the growing reality that queens could act independently and even reshape the political order through force and strategy. Philippa of Hainaut, the queen consort of Edward III, provided a contrasting image of regal partnership and moral steadiness. Married at a young age, she quickly became beloved by the English people for her humility, compassion, and commitment to her role. But Philippa was not merely a figurehead. She actively supported her husband's reign, particularly during the early years of the Hundred Years' War. One of the most iconic moments of her queenship came during the Siege of Calais in 1347. After the town's surrender, Edward III ordered the execution of 6 prominent citizens. Philippa famously intervened, pleading with her husband to show mercy, which he granted. This act of intercession not only bolstered her popularity, but also helped humanize the image of royal justice in a time of war and conquest. Philippa also played a significant role in shaping the royal household and promoting the arts. Her court became a center of learning and culture, hosting scholars, chroniclers, and poets. She supported Jean Froissart, whose chronicles would become a vital source for the history of the era. As a mother, Philippa produced a large family, including Edward, the Black Prince, one of the most celebrated military leaders of the period. Her children's marriages furthered dynastic ambitions and solidified alliances across Europe. Philippa's model of queenship, marked by loyalty, discretion, and cultural patronage, set a standard that future queens would aspire to emulate. The last of the 5, Margaret of Anjou, enters the scene during one of England's most turbulent periods, the Wars of the Roses. As the wife of the mentally unstable Henry VI, Margaret found herself thrust into the role of de facto ruler. With her husband incapacitated, the burden of leadership and the defense of the Lancastrian cause fell to her shoulders. Unlike many of her predecessors, Margaret was not content with managing the court or overseeing religious patronage. She took up arms, organized military campaigns, and made critical decisions that shaped the outcome of battles. Her tenacity and ambition earned her admiration from supporters and vitriol from opponents. Margaret's queenship was defined by conflict and resilience. She fiercely protected her son's claim to the throne and forged alliances with powerful nobles to preserve the Lancastrian dynasty. Her enemies painted her as ruthless and overreaching, often vilifying her as a foreign interloper meddling in English politics. But her determination was born of necessity. Without a strong husband to shield her or guide the kingdom, she had to become the kingdom's protector. Her leadership during the battles of Wakefield and Towton, though ultimately unsuccessful, demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to her cause. Even after defeat and exile, Margaret continued to advocate for her son's rights, embodying a vision of queenship that was militant, political, and unyielding. Together, these 5 queens represent a powerful arc in the evolution of royal womanhood in England. Matilda of Flanders helped stabilize a newly conquered kingdom and establish a model of Norman queenship. Eleanor of Aquitaine brought European culture and aristocratic power into the heart of the English court. Isabella of France demonstrated how queens could rise and rule, even overthrowing a king. Philippa of Hainaut reflected the virtues of loyalty, intercession, and cultural enrichment. Margaret of Anjou turned queenship into a battlefield role, defending her son's birthright in a kingdom divided by civil war. In their hands, the position of queen evolved from a ceremonial and domestic role into one of profound political consequence. These women advised kings, served as regents, organized military campaigns, and curated royal legacies through patronage and historical narrative. Each one navigated a world dominated by male power, but they found ways to assert their agency, often redefining what it meant to be a queen in medieval England. Their legacies, though sometimes obscured by myth, misogyny, or political propaganda, are central to understanding the development of English monarchy and the often hidden power of royal women. Through their actions, choices, and struggles, they expanded the very boundaries of what queenship could mean, laying the foundation for the iconic female rulers who would follow in the centuries to come. Tudor queens. The period from 1485 to 1603 marks one of the most dramatic and transformative eras in English history, the reign of the Tudors. At its core, this era was defined by dynastic consolidation, religious revolution, and unprecedented female rule. The queens of the Tudor dynasty were not merely passive figures seated beside kings. They were pivotal architects of legitimacy, reform, and national identity. Their stories interwove love and betrayal, political ambition and personal tragedy, and in many cases, determined the very fate of the monarchy. From Elizabeth of York, who united a fractured kingdom, to Elizabeth I, who ruled it with an iron will for nearly half a century, Tudor queens redefined the role of women in power. Some were consorts, others regents, and two were queens regnant, ruling in their own right. Together, their experiences reflect both the constraints and opportunities of queenship in an age of turmoil and transformation. Elizabeth of York became queen through one of the most politically significant marriages in English history. Her union with Henry VII in 1486 effectively ended the bloody Wars of the Roses by merging the rival houses of York and Lancaster. As the daughter of Edward IV and the niece of Richard III, Elizabeth brought Yorkist legitimacy to the newly founded Tudor dynasty. Her marriage helped stabilize the realm and solidify Henry's claim, which had been gained on the battlefield at Bosworth rather than inherited through undisputed lineage. The symbolic power of their union was emphasized in statecraft, pageantry, and heraldry, with the emblem of the Tudor rose, a blend of the red and white roses, embodying national reconciliation. Although Elizabeth played little overt political role, her presence was central to the monarchy's image. She bore several children, including the future Henry VIII, and her reputation for beauty, virtue, and loyalty made her a beloved queen. Her conduct contrasted sharply with the factional chaos and court intrigue that had characterized previous decades. In many ways, she was the ideal consort, gracious, fertile, and dignified, offering a calming presence that supported her husband's carefully constructed reign. Her early death in 1503, shortly after childbirth, cast a shadow over the Tudor household, but her legacy endured through her children and the legitimacy she had imparted to the fledgling dynasty. From this union was born Henry VIII, a monarch whose 6 wives would each reshape the monarchy and nation in unique and lasting ways. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, was a Spanish princess and the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. Her marriage to Henry was first formed through a political alliance. She had previously been wed to his brother Arthur, who died young, and then reaffirmed with Henry himself. For over 2 decades, Catherine served as queen, and during much of that time, their marriage appeared stable. She was learned, deeply religious, and popular among the people. She presided over court life with dignity, sponsored scholars, and even served as regent during one of Henry's military campaigns, where she oversaw England's defense against Scotland. However, her failure to produce a male heir and Henry's growing infatuation with one of her ladies-in-waiting and Boleyn sparked a political and religious crisis that would change England forever. When Henry sought an annulment, the Pope's refusal to grant it led to a seismic break with the Catholic Church. Catherine's personal misfortune became the catalyst for England's transition to Protestantism. She refused to accept the annulment, insisted she was Henry's true wife, and endured exile from court with steadfast dignity. Her moral authority and religious devotion won her lasting admiration, while her resistance forced Henry to challenge centuries of papal supremacy, resulting in the creation of the Church of England. Catherine's legacy is one of integrity and resilience. Her personal struggle triggered a national transformation. Anne Boleyn's rise was meteoric, and her fall equally spectacular. Intelligent, ambitious, and politically astute, Anne captivated Henry with her wit and charm, refusing to become his mistress and insisting on marriage. This bold stance led Henry to sever ties with Rome in order to marry her, establishing himself as head of the English Church. For a brief period, Anne wielded enormous influence. She championed religious reformers, promoted evangelical ideas, and helped usher in Protestant changes at court. Her court became a hub of reformist thought, and her allies benefited from her ascendancy. However, Anne's position was always precarious. She failed to give Henry the son he so desperately desired, though she did give birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, the future queen. Court factions turned against her, and her enemies capitalized on the king's waning affection. Accused of adultery, incest, and treason, charges widely regarded as fabricated, she was executed in 1536. Anne Boleyn's legacy is complex. She was a reformer, a political player, and a tragic victim of Tudor politics. Yet through her daughter Elizabeth, she helped create one of England's greatest monarchs. Her reign was brief, but her impact enduring. After Anne's fall, Henry quickly married Jane Seymour. Jane presented a striking contrast, modest, obedient, and traditional in her piety. She succeeded where others had failed by providing Henry with a long-awaited male heir, Edward VI. Tragically, she died shortly after his birth, leaving behind a profound sense of loss in the king, who considered her his true wife. Though her queenship was short-lived, Jane's importance lay in securing the Tudor succession. Her posthumous reputation benefited from her untimely death, as she was spared the political turmoil and disgrace that befell many of Henry's other wives. She became an idealized figure in Tudor memory, the chaste and virtuous queen who fulfilled her duty and passed away before courtly factions could tarnish her image. Jane was followed by Anne of Cleves, a German princess selected for diplomatic reasons to cement an alliance with Protestant powers in Europe. However, Henry found her physically unappealing, and the marriage was never consummated. Their union was annulled within months, but Anne handled the situation with grace and tact. She accepted the dissolution and was rewarded with a generous settlement and the honorary title of the king's beloved sister. She remained in England and maintained cordial relations with the royal family, even attending the coronations of Henry's children. Though often remembered for Henry's disappointment in her appearance, Anne's story is one of adaptation and survival in a treacherous environment. Catherine Howard, in stark contrast, was young, vivacious, and ill-prepared for the dangers of the Tudor court. A cousin of Anne Boleyn, she was married to Henry when he was already aging and in poor health. Her youthful indiscretions and alleged extramarital affairs during her queenship led to her arrest and execution. Catherine's downfall highlighted the perils of court life for young women, especially those caught in the web of political manipulation. She was a tragic figure, remembered less for her actions than for the ruthless way she was discarded. Her story serves as a grim reminder of the volatility of royal favor and the limited agency afforded to women at court. Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, was a widow and intellectual who married the king late in his life. Unlike many of her predecessors, she managed to survive her marriage and outlive Henry. She acted as nurse, companion, and counselor to the ailing monarch, and she also served as regent during his campaigns in France. Catherine was a reformer, a writer, and a scholar, publishing religious texts and promoting education for women. Her influence extended to Henry's children, particularly Elizabeth, whom she helped educate and guide. Catherine's tact and intelligence enabled her to navigate the dangers of court politics while advancing Protestant reforms. She is remembered as a survivor, resilient, pragmatic, and quietly influential. While the Queen's consort played vital roles, the Tudor era also saw, for the first time, women ascending the throne in their own right. Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, became the first queen regnant of England in 1553. Her reign was shaped by her determination to restore Catholicism and reverse the Protestant changes made by her father and brother. She married Philip II of Spain, a union designed to bolster Catholic power, though it was unpopular with the English people. Mary faced rebellion, religious division, and infertility, all of which undermined her authority. Her attempts to return England to papal allegiance led to the persecution of Protestants, burnings that earned her the infamous title, Bloody Mary. Yet Mary was more than a religious zealot. She was a determined, principled ruler who believed she was restoring spiritual truth to her people. Her reign was short and tragic, but she proved that a woman could wield sovereign power. Her failure to produce an heir, however, ensured that the throne passed to her half-sister, Elizabeth. Despite her grim reputation, Mary laid the groundwork for future female sovereignty by asserting her right to rule and refusing to be treated as a placeholder until a male could take her place. Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, would take the lessons of her predecessors and build a reign that came to define an age. Ascending the throne in 1558, Elizabeth inherited a divided kingdom. She faced threats from Catholic Europe, questions about her legitimacy, and intense pressure to marry. Yet she turned her unmarried status into a political asset, cultivating the image of the Virgin Queen, wedded to her country. Her skillful use of pageantry, portraiture, and oratory created a powerful mythology around her rule. She was Gloriana, a near-divine figure who embodied the strength and virtue of the English nation. Elizabeth's reign was marked by political stability, religious compromise, and cultural flourishing. She enacted a religious settlement that sought to balance Protestant doctrine with traditional ritual, appeasing many factions without wholly satisfying any. Her government navigated conspiracies, rebellions, and foreign threats, most famously defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588, a triumph that solidified her status as a national savior. Elizabeth surrounded herself with capable ministers like William Cecil and Francis Walsingham and proved adept at playing rival factions against one another. Despite constant calls to marry, Elizabeth remained single, using courtship as a diplomatic tool while maintaining her independence. Her personal sacrifices, childlessness, loneliness, and the burdens of leadership were enormous, but they allowed her to rule unchallenged. The cult of Elizabeth, with its poems, masks, and symbols, created a national identity centered on loyalty to the crown and reverence for a woman who had become more than human. She ruled for 45 years, longer than any previous English monarch, and her death in 1603 marked the end of the Tudor dynasty. The queens of the Tudor period, consort and sovereign alike, shaped not only the monarchy but also the identity of the English state. Some ruled beside kings, others in their own name. They gave birth to future monarchs, guided national religion, and managed complex diplomatic and domestic challenges. Each woman faced unique trials, yet all had to negotiate the fraught intersection of gender and power in a society that was both fascinated and fearful of female rule. Through their lives, one sees the Tudor court not as a backdrop to male ambition, but as a crucible in which female agency, intelligence, and resilience were tested and often triumphed. Their legacies endure not just in portraits and chronicles, but in the very structure of the monarchy they helped define. Stuart queens. Anne of Denmark became Queen Consort of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1603 when her husband James VI of Scotland ascended to the English throne as James I. Her arrival in England marked the beginning of the Stuart era and played a significant role in the cultural life of the early Stuart court, emerging as a devoted patron of the arts. Her court was a vibrant center for theater, masks, architecture, and painting, and she is credited with advancing the careers of many artists and writers. Anne's love for elaborate court entertainments helped reinforce the image of monarchy as a spectacle, supporting the grandeur and legitimacy of the Stuart rule. Despite her often contentious relationship with James, especially regarding the upbringing of their children and religious differences, and being a Catholic convert while James was Protestant, she was politically astute. After the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, which aimed to assassinate her husband and restore Catholic rule, Anne navigated the dangerous religious tensions with care. Though not directly involved in politics, she exercised soft diplomacy through her patronage, relationships with foreign ambassadors, and influence at court. Her presence in England helped to ease the dynastic transition and elevate the cultural prestige of the Stuart monarchy. Henrietta Maria of France married Charles I in 1625, bringing with her not only a powerful Catholic alliance, but also deep cultural influence. As a French Catholic queen in a predominantly Protestant nation, Henrietta Maria's presence was politically contentious from the beginning. Her marriage was intended to foster better relations between England and Catholic France, but her faith and open practice of Catholicism stirred suspicion and resentment among many in England. Despite this, she remained fiercely loyal to her husband and proved herself a dynamic, politically engaged queen. During the English Civil War, Henrietta Maria was a steadfast supporter of the royalist cause. She undertook perilous journeys to the continent to secure funds, arms, and foreign support for Charles. Her determination and political involvement made her a symbol of royalist resistance, though also a target for parliamentary propaganda. Following the king's execution in 1649, Henrietta Maria lived in exile, mourning the monarchy's downfall and working to maintain her family's claims from abroad. Her legacy is closely tied to the cultural and political tensions that led to the Civil War, and she remains a figure of controversy for her role in shaping the Stuart struggle between monarchy and parliament. Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess, became the wife of Charles II in 1662. Their marriage solidified the Anglo-Portuguese alliance, bringing with it significant political and economic benefits, including trading privileges and the acquisition of Bombay and Tangier. Catherine's arrival in England represented a diplomatic victory, but her experience as queen consort was shaped by personal hardship and political suspicion. Like Henrietta Maria, Catherine was a Catholic queen in a Protestant country, and her faith sparked tension at court and in Parliament. She endured considerable pressure to convert and was often the subject of anti-Catholic sentiment. Despite her inability to bear a surviving heir, which strained her relationship with Charles and invited criticism, Catherine remained committed to her husband and avoided overt political engagement. The succession crisis that followed Charles's reign, known as the Exclusion Crisis, revolved in part around fears of a Catholic dynasty, a fear intensified by Catherine's continued presence and influence at court. Nevertheless, she managed to survive politically where others might have fallen, thanks to her discretion and resilience. Over time, she earned a degree of public sympathy and respect, and after Charles's death, she lived quietly until returning to Portugal. Her story reflects the fraught intersection of dynastic marriage, religion, and national identity in Restoration England. Mary II, daughter of James II and wife of William of Orange, reigned jointly with her husband following the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Her ascent to the throne was unprecedented in that it involved the deposition of her own father in favor of a Protestant regime. Mary, raised Protestant despite her Catholic father, found herself in a deeply conflicted personal and political situation. Yet, she accepted the crown in what was framed as a constitutional necessity. Alongside William III, she presided over a transformative moment in British history, marked by the formal limitation of monarchical power and the affirmation of parliamentary supremacy through the Bill of Rights 1689. Mary's reign, though largely dominated by her husband's political leadership, saw her acting as sole ruler during William's absences on campaign. In these periods, she demonstrated competence and decisiveness, working to stabilize the nation and support Protestant religious reform. Mary was known for her personal piety, modesty, and strong sense of duty, which helped legitimize her rule in the eyes of the Protestant majority. Her reign brought increased toleration for Protestant dissenters and helped solidify the principles of constitutional monarchy. Her early death in 1694 was widely mourned, and she left behind a legacy of moral leadership and political prudence in one of the most critical periods of British constitutional development. Anne, the younger sister of Mary II, succeeded to the throne in 1702 after the death of William III and became the last Stuart monarch. Her reign, though often overshadowed by more dominant political figures, was significant for several reasons, and inherited a realm divided by religious tension, partisan conflict, and the ongoing War of the Spanish Succession. Though she was plagued by poor health and personal tragedy, having endured numerous pregnancies without a surviving heir, and remained a devoted monarch. Her personal losses humanized her in the public eye, and she became a symbol of resilience and dedication. Politically, Anne's reign marked the strengthening of the two-party system, with Whigs and Tories vying for influence at court. She was deeply involved in appointments and cabinet decisions, even as power gradually shifted toward Parliament. One of the most momentous achievements of her reign was the Act of Union in 1707, which united England and Scotland into the single kingdom of Great Britain. This legislative union reshaped the political landscape of the British Isles and laid the foundation for the modern British state, and also presided over military successes during the War of the Spanish Succession, with victories under the Duke of Marlborough bolstering national pride and asserting Britain's growing power on the European stage. Yet, her reign was also marked by intense factionalism and personal rivalries, particularly with confidants like Sarah Churchill. Anne's death in 1714 brought the Stuart dynasty to an end, ushering in the Hanoverian succession under George I. Despite the challenges she faced, Anne's reign was crucial in shaping early 18th century Britain and transitioning the monarchy into a more constitutional form. Her dedication to duty and national unity remains a poignant legacy. Hanoverian and Victorian queens. Caroline of Ansbach, consort to George II, was among the most intellectually vibrant and politically aware queens in British history. Born into the cultured courts of Germany, she brought with her a love of learning and a deep engagement with Enlightenment ideas. Her arrival in Britain marked a significant turn in the character of the royal household, with Caroline acting not merely as a ceremonial figure, but as an active force in both politics and culture. She was known for her wit, intellect, and persuasive charm, all of which she used to great effect behind the scenes. Though the formal political structures of the time excluded women from overt power, Caroline shaped the policy direction of her husband's reign in subtle but consequential ways. She had a close partnership with Robert Walpole, the first de facto prime minister, and worked with him to ensure political stability. Caroline often used her influence over George II to moderate his more impulsive tendencies, ensuring that the crown maintained good relations with Parliament. More than a political operative, she was also a key figure in advancing the ideas of the Enlightenment within Britain. Caroline corresponded with leading thinkers of the day, including philosophers, theologians, and scientists. She supported education, religious tolerance, and rational discourse, and her patronage helped advance the careers of many men of letters. Her salons were intellectual hothouses, where ideas were debated and disseminated. She encouraged open discussion and was known to challenge clergymen and scholars alike in spirited conversation. Her support for the Church of England was balanced with a progressive view of religion, favoring moderation and reform rather than dogmatic orthodoxy. Her death in 1737 marked the end of a period of royal influence that was unusually effective and constructive. Caroline of Ansbach left behind a legacy of enlightened monarchy, one that valued reason, stability, and the gentle assertion of influence rather than authoritarian command. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, who became queen consort to George III, represented a return to a more domestic and pious model of queenship. Unlike her predecessor Caroline, Charlotte was less politically involved, though her role was no less vital. Her marriage to George III in 1761 marked the beginning of a union based on duty, stability, and shared religious values. They formed a close and affectionate partnership that emphasized family life and moral rectitude. Charlotte bore 15 children, playing an instrumental role in nurturing a sense of familial cohesion within the royal household. Her influence was evident in the strict standards of conduct she imposed, not just within her family, but across the court. The Queen fostered an atmosphere of decorum and decency, setting a tone for society that would later influence early Victorian morality. Charlotte's steadfast presence proved particularly important during George III's recurring bouts of mental illness. Her devotion to him was unwavering, even during periods when he was unrecognizable due to his condition. Though she was often overwhelmed by the burden of care, she remained committed to preserving the dignity of the monarchy. The emotional toll of her husband's illness eventually led to a more withdrawn existence, but her sense of duty never faltered. Throughout these trials, Charlotte maintained a public image of serenity and strength. She also played a significant role during key moments of national crisis, such as the American Revolution. Though not directly involved in the political deliberations, she was a figure of continuity and reassurance during an era of uncertainty and change. Charlotte's patronage of the arts and botany also left a mark on the cultural landscape of Britain. She supported artists, musicians, and scientists, including the young Mozart, and was instrumental in the development of Kew Gardens. Her enduring popularity and model of quiet, devoted queenship contributed to a redefinition of what it meant to be a royal consort, especially in an age of growing public scrutiny and political instability. Queen Adelaide, consort to William IV, is often remembered for her simplicity, piety, and compassion. She came to the throne at a time when Britain was undergoing profound social and political change. The country was still adjusting to the consequences of the Napoleonic Wars and faced mounting pressure for reform. Adelaide's influence was not in shaping government policy, but in cultivating a sense of moral integrity and public virtue at court. Unlike more politically ambitious queens, Adelaide embraced a quieter form of service, dedicating herself to charitable causes and religious life. Her acts of charity, support for hospitals, and aid to the poor made her a beloved figure, especially among the common people. Her demeanor was consistently modest, humble, and unpretentious, which contrasted sharply with the extravagance that had occasionally characterized earlier reigns. Adelaide's piety influenced the tone of court life. She insisted on religious observance and ethical conduct and did her best to avoid scandal. She also played a motherly role within the royal family, especially to the young Princess Victoria, whose own upbringing she watched over with care and concern. In this way, she served as a transitional figure between the older traditions of monarchy and the new expectations that would define the Victorian era. Though her husband's reign was brief and relatively uneventful, Adelaide's impact on royal culture was lasting. She provided a moral foundation that the Victorians would later adopt and amplify, emphasizing the monarch's role as a moral leader and symbol of domestic stability. Queen Victoria, one of the most iconic monarchs in world history, reigned for over 6 decades, presiding over a transformative period in British and global history. Born into a complex web of royal alliances, Victoria inherited the throne in 1837 as a young and relatively untested monarch. Yet her reign came to define an entire era, marked by empire, industrialization, and social reform. Early in her reign, Victoria leaned heavily on the guidance of her first Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, but she quickly grew into her role. Her keen sense of duty, emotional resilience, and commitment to constitutional monarchy allowed her to navigate the vast political changes of the 19th century. Under her rule, Britain saw the expansion of the empire to unprecedented scale, encompassing territories across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Victoria's reign coincided with the peak of the Industrial Revolution, during which the nation underwent extraordinary technological, economic, and social change. As factories multiplied, railways expanded, and cities grew, Victoria symbolized stability amidst rapid transformation. She embraced the idea of the monarch as a unifying symbol, above the fray of politics, but deeply invested in the moral fabric of the nation. She cultivated a public image that emphasized family, virtue, and national pride. This image was not just political, it was deeply personal. Her relationship with Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was central to her identity and reign. The two were partners in both family and state, sharing a vision of moral reform, technological progress, and cultural development. Albert's influence on Victoria was profound. He modernized the court, took interest in the arts and sciences, and played an active role in political discussion. Together, They cultivated an image of the monarchy that reflected the values of the rising middle class. The Great Exhibition of 1851, championed by Albert, was emblematic of the couple's vision. Held in the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, it celebrated British industrial prowess and imperial power. Victoria's enthusiastic support for the exhibition reflected her commitment to progress and innovation. Yet the stability of this golden era was shattered by Albert's death in 1861. Victoria was devastated. She withdrew from public life for many years, dressing in mourning and retreating into a life of seclusion. Her absence sparked criticism and raised questions about the monarchy's relevance in a modern democracy. But over time, Victoria transformed widowhood into a form of queenship. She became the symbolic Widow of Windsor, a matriarchal figure who ruled through sorrow and endurance. This new image resonated with a public that valued emotional sincerity and moral fortitude. Her personal mourning took on national dimensions, reinforcing the idea that the sovereign could reflect and guide the sentiments of the people. As the century progressed, Victoria became more politically active, especially in foreign affairs. Her correspondence with ministers, diplomats, and foreign rulers was extensive, and she took a keen interest in the workings of the British Empire. She presided over an age of unprecedented expansion, but also of complex political tensions. Her title of Empress of India, granted in 1876, epitomized her status as a global sovereign. Yet Victoria was also conscious of the challenges that empire brought, its contradictions, inequalities, and costs. While her own views often reflected the conservative values of her upbringing, she maintained an ongoing interest in the well-being of her subjects across the empire. In her later years, Victoria became a beloved and unifying figure across the British world. Her jubilees were celebrated with unprecedented enthusiasm, bringing people together from across the empire to honor her long and devoted service. She had become not just a ruler, but a symbol of continuity, strength, and maternal care. When she died in 1901, the world mourned not only the passing of a queen, but the end of an era. The Victorian age had witnessed extraordinary growth, reform, and complexity, and Victoria's life had been intricately woven into each of these changes. Her legacy endured long after her death, influencing the shape of monarchy, empire, and society well into the 20th century. In her blend of public duty, private virtue, and symbolic resonance, Victoria redefined the British monarchy for the modern age. Windsor Queens. Mary of Teck, queen consort to George V, was born into the Teck branch of the royal family, a relatively minor German ducal house that had settled in Britain. Although her lineage was not at the top of the aristocratic hierarchy, she was groomed with the grace, dignity, and values expected of a future queen. Initially engaged to Prince Albert Victor, the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, her life took a dramatic turn when he died unexpectedly in 1892. Eventually, she became engaged to and married his younger brother, the future George V. Their marriage was solid and traditional, deeply grounded in duty rather than romantic affection, though mutual respect and loyalty grew between them. Mary's life was shaped by a rigid sense of discipline, propriety, and unyielding devotion to the monarchy, qualities that would prove crucial during the trials ahead. When her husband ascended the throne in 1910, Mary quickly adapted to her role as queen. She was a staunch supporter of the monarchy and understood the importance of continuity, symbolism, and tradition. Her public image projected calmness and stoicism, qualities that the British people valued, especially as Europe edged toward the Great War. During World War I, Mary of Teck proved herself a wartime queen. Although she did not engage in battlefield activities, her behind-the-scenes work was substantial. She visited wounded soldiers, encouraged morale among civilians, and engaged in extensive charitable efforts. The monarchy needed to be visibly part of the national effort, and Mary ensured this image was upheld through constant presence and engagement. A major turning point came in 1917 when anti-German sentiment in Britain was reaching a fever pitch due to the horrors of trench warfare. The royal family, with its many German connections and a distinctly German surname, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, found itself under public scrutiny. In response, George V, with Mary's full support, took the bold decision to change the family name to Windsor after the iconic English castle. This symbolic renaming was more than a rebranding. It represented the monarchy's deeper integration with British identity. Mary embraced the change and helped project the image of a thoroughly British royal family. Her support of this transition helped preserve the monarchy's relevance during a time when monarchies across Europe were crumbling. Mary's influence extended well beyond her reign as consort. She was a formidable figure within the royal household, continuing to advise and guide after the death of her husband in 1936. She lived through the abdication crisis of her son, Edward VIII, which shook the monarchy to its core, and stood by her second son, George VI, as he reluctantly took the throne. Mary of Teck represented continuity, tradition, and the values of duty over personal desire. She passed on a strict sense of royal responsibility to her descendants, particularly her granddaughter, the future Queen Elizabeth II, who would embody those lessons throughout her reign. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, best known later as the Queen Mother, married Prince Albert, Duke of York, in 1923, eventually becoming queen consort when her husband ascended the throne as George VI following his brother Edward VIII's abdication. Unlike many previous consorts, Elizabeth came from British aristocracy rather than European royalty, endearing her to the British public. Her charm, warmth, and resilience would define her tenure as queen and establish her as a symbol of national fortitude during Britain's darkest hours. The abdication crisis of 1936 had left the monarchy vulnerable and uncertain. George VI was unprepared for kingship, shy, and prone to stammering under pressure. Elizabeth played a crucial role in stabilizing his confidence, helping him navigate the burdens of kingship. As queen, she was not a passive figure but an active supporter of her husband, especially during World War II. At a time when morale was critical, she refused to evacuate from London, declaring she would not leave without the king, and the king would never leave. This public stance earned her immense respect. She visited bombed-out areas during the Blitz, met with civilians, and projected strength through her unflinching presence. Her famous visit to the East End after a bombing, dressed with care and dignity, symbolized royal solidarity with the suffering population. She was also instrumental in sustaining the spirit of the monarchy during wartime, representing continuity and hope. Her speeches, appearances, and calm demeanor reassured a nation under siege. Her influence over her daughters, especially Princess Elizabeth, laid the groundwork for the next generation of monarchy, instilling a powerful sense of duty and public service. The end of the war brought enormous changes, but Elizabeth's steady hand helped the monarchy retain its symbolic importance in a rapidly shifting world. After George VI's death in 1952, she stepped into her new role as Queen Mother. Though no longer consort, she remained an active figure in royal life for decades. She continued to make public appearances, maintain traditions, and serve as a moral guide for the royal family. Her popularity grew with time. She came to embody not just the monarchy's past, but its endurance. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, she stood as a reassuring figure amidst change, watching over her daughter's reign and guiding younger generations with grace and experience. Her longevity and public affection helped ensure that, even in times of crisis or controversy, the monarchy retained a sense of dignity and historical weight. Queen Elizabeth II's reign would become the longest in British history, stretching from 1952 until her death in 2022. Ascending the throne at just 25 years old, she inherited not only the weight of empire and tradition but also the expectations of a rapidly modernizing world. Her reign saw Britain transition from a global empire to a post-colonial power, and her monarchy adapted to changes in technology, society, and international politics with measured grace. The Queen's primary role was to be a unifying figure above politics, and she performed this function with unwavering consistency. She remained a constant presence through countless social and political transformations, from the Cold War to Brexit, from the space age to the digital revolution. Central to Elizabeth's early reign was the transformation of the British Empire into the Commonwealth of Nations. She embraced this new, voluntary association with enthusiasm, traveling extensively and establishing deep personal relationships with leaders across the globe. Her role as head of the Commonwealth helped preserve British influence and cultural ties even as former colonies gained independence. Under her guidance, the monarchy became more international in its image and outreach, with Elizabeth acting as a symbol of continuity and shared heritage. At home, Elizabeth maintained a careful balance between tradition and adaptation. She navigated the rise of television and used it to modernize royal visibility, allowing her coronation to be broadcast live, a revolutionary moment that connected millions of Britons to the monarchy in a deeply personal way. Over the years, she opened Buckingham Palace to the public, instituted changes in royal protocol, and participated in efforts to make the monarchy more accessible and transparent. However, her reign was not without its challenges. A series of family scandals and tragedies tested the royal family's public standing. The breakdown of the marriages of her children, especially the highly public divorce of Charles and Diana, brought intense media scrutiny. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 posed a particularly grave crisis. The Queen's initial reticence to respond publicly was widely criticized, but she later addressed the nation in a broadcast that helped restore faith in the monarchy. Her steady presence, even during controversy, earned her renewed respect. In her later years, Elizabeth cultivated an image of the monarch as a matriarchal figure, wise, composed, and deeply committed to service. She remained active well into her 90s, continuing official duties and maintaining public engagements with remarkable energy. Her Platinum Jubilee in 2022 marked 70 years on the throne, a feat unmatched in British history. Throughout her reign, she embodied a vision of the monarchy rooted in duty, discretion, and dignity. She avoided political entanglements while maintaining warm relationships with countless world leaders and prime ministers. Elizabeth's reign symbolized the endurance of monarchy in a modern world. She oversaw the transformation of British society from post-war austerity to multicultural, digital modernity. Through it all, her public image remained largely unshaken. Her funeral in 2022 was a global event, watched by millions, and marked the end of a second Elizabethan age. She left behind a legacy of quiet strength and relentless service, having shaped the monarchy not through power or reform, but through constancy and character. Camilla, now Queen Consort to King Charles III, represents one of the most dramatic and complex evolutions in the story of modern British monarchy. Her rise to queenship was long and controversial, marked by years of public disapproval, media scrutiny, and shifting public perceptions. Camilla Parker Bowles had been romantically involved with Charles since the early 1970s, but their relationship was interrupted by marriages, tradition, and royal expectations. Her role in the breakdown of Charles's marriage to Diana, Princess of Wales, cast her in an unfavorable light for decades. For many years, she remained a highly controversial figure, vilified in the press and regarded with suspicion by the public. However, with time, careful strategy, and unwavering commitment, Camilla transformed her public image. After her marriage to Charles in 2005, she gradually took on royal duties, accompanied him on official tours, and became an active patron of numerous charities. Her work focused particularly on issues like osteoporosis awareness, literacy, domestic abuse, and animal welfare. She showed herself to be a diligent and compassionate consort, maintaining a low public profile while quietly earning respect. Camilla's ability to win public trust over time was not only a testament to her own adaptability, but also indicative of how the monarchy itself was changing. The royal family was becoming more transparent, more willing to acknowledge past mistakes, and more attuned to the public mood. Camilla's gradual acceptance into the royal fold coincided with this broader trend. Her marriage to Charles was a turning point that allowed the monarchy to move forward from the traumas of the 1990s and present a more unified front. When Queen Elizabeth II expressed her wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort upon Charles's accession, it was a significant endorsement. It marked the culmination of decades of public rehabilitation and royal integration. Upon becoming queen consort in 2022, Camilla assumed a more prominent public role. She stood by Charles's side during their coronation, an event that reflected the monarchy's blend of tradition and modernity. Unlike her predecessors, Camilla's queenship was not defined by birthright or early royal grooming, but by perseverance, redefinition, and adaptation. In many ways, Camilla represents the contemporary face of the monarchy, flawed, human, and evolving. She does not embody the grandeur or mystique of earlier queens, but rather the realism and relatability necessary for the monarchy's survival in the 21st century. Her story is one of redemption, not only personal but institutional. By gradually taking on responsibilities, supporting causes quietly but passionately, and remaining steady in her support of the king, Camilla has helped re-establish the idea of a working royal partnership. As queen consort, she plays a stabilizing role in a period of uncertainty and generational transition. Her presence ensures continuity, while her history reminds the public that the monarchy is not an unchanging relic, but a living institution capable of transformation. Her journey from scandal to acceptance underscores how public attitudes and royal traditions can shift, and how personal perseverance can redefine destiny. Through her late ascent to queenship, Camilla has become an unlikely symbol of the monarchy's adaptability and endurance in a complex modern world. Throughout the history of England and later Britain, queens have embodied more than ceremonial grandeur. They have often been powerful political players, symbols of religious continuity or change, figures of romantic idealism and scandal, bearers of dynastic hopes, and patrons of culture and the arts. Their legacies are not confined to palaces and portraits. They have helped shape the very soul of the nation across centuries. These women's lives illuminate recurring themes that transcend the specific eras in which they lived, revealing enduring tensions, ambitions, and societal expectations placed upon them. Power and politics have always been central to queenship, whether the queen was a regnant, ruling in her own right, or a consort, wife to a king. Queens like Elizabeth I and Queen and wielded political power with considerable skill, often negotiating turbulent courts, religious tensions, and foreign threats. Even as consorts, many queens exercised significant influence. Eleanor of Aquitaine shaped political strategy in both France and England, while Queen Caroline of Ansbach was a major political force behind her husband George II, guiding ministers and influencing foreign policy. Queens acted as regents during their sons' minorities, Margaret of Anjou for Henry VI, or Isabella of France, who helped depose her husband Edward II. Sometimes their political influence turned them into lightning rods for criticism. Anne Boleyn's ascendancy provoked religious and political chaos, while Henrietta Maria was blamed for Charles I's absolutist tendencies that led to civil war. Queens navigated their power within the limitations of their gender and the expectations of their age. Many operated behind the throne or through male advisors, but others became rebels in their own right. Mary, Queen of Scots, embroiled in plots and foreign intrigue, eventually paid the price for her ambition with her life. Queens often represented stability, but could just as easily symbolize upheaval when their political choices or foreign origins clashed with national identity. Their power was never absolute. It was contested, mediated, and in constant negotiation with broader political forces. Faith and religion have been defining pillars of queenship, especially during England's long and violent religious transformations. Queens often bore the brunt of the religious conflict between Catholicism and Protestantism. Mary I, known as Bloody Mary, attempted to return England to Roman Catholicism with ruthless efficiency, burning hundreds of Protestants at the stake. In stark contrast, her half-sister Elizabeth I embraced Protestantism and crafted a religious settlement that defined Anglican identity for generations. Their reigns epitomize how deeply intertwined queenship and religious authority could be. Queens were not only defenders of faith, but also reformers. Queen Victoria's long reign, though less overtly religious in terms of policy, reinforced a moral and religious tone that defined 19th-century Britain. Queens also personified religious unity, often symbolizing the ideal of a divinely appointed ruler. Even consorts shaped religious life at court. Catherine of Aragon was a devout Catholic whose refusal to accept Henry VIII's divorce launched the English Reformation. Later, Queen Henrietta Maria's open Catholicism caused public outcry and suspicion in a predominantly Protestant country, stoking fears of foreign influence and religious subversion. Love, marriage, and scandal lie at the heart of many queens' public and private narratives. Queens were almost never free to marry as they chose. Political alliances took precedence over personal affection. Yet despite the constraints of diplomacy, love, and the absence of it, shaped royal histories in dramatic ways. Elizabeth I famously remained unmarried, projecting herself as the Virgin Queen, married to her nation. Her choice defied expectations and became a tool of political power. By contrast, Mary, Queen of Scots, married 3 times, each union marred by scandal, murder, or betrayal, severely damaging her reputation and political standing. Consorts, too, were judged harshly. Anne Boleyn's relationship with Henry VIII began in passionate secrecy and ended in brutal execution, emblematic of how swiftly courtly love could sour into political disaster. In later centuries, Queen Caroline's fidelity to George IV was questioned, and Princess Diana's troubled marriage to Prince Charles became a global media spectacle, further intertwining monarchy with scandal in the public imagination. Queens have also been victims of gossip and rumor, their fertility and morality dissected by courtiers, chroniclers, and, in modern times, tabloids. Their personal lives were never truly private. Court intrigue, rumored affairs, and contested paternity left lasting stains on royal legacies, even when such accusations were unfounded. Motherhood and dynastic pressure have perhaps been the most intimate yet politically charged elements of queenship. The production of heirs was a queen's sacred and civic duty. Failure to produce a male heir could spell political instability or even deposition. Catherine of Aragon's inability to bear a surviving son drove Henry VIII to seek annulment, triggering seismic religious and constitutional changes. Anne Boleyn, too, was undone by her failure to produce a male heir, despite giving birth to Elizabeth I, one of England's most remarkable monarchs. Even when successful in childbearing, queens bore the emotional toll of repeated miscarriages, stillbirths, and the deaths of infants, sorrows that were often suffered in public. Mary of Modena, the Catholic queen of James II, was accused of faking the birth of her son in the infamous warming pan scandal, which undermined the monarchy's legitimacy and contributed to the Glorious Revolution. Yet queens were also powerful symbols of motherhood. Queen Victoria, with her 9 children, exemplified the image of the nurturing yet regal mother, setting a domestic tone for the Victorian age. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the Queen Mother, became a national symbol of endurance and maternal strength during the Second World War, reinforcing the monarchy's image of compassion and duty. But the pressure was not only biological, it was dynastic. Queens had to embody the continuity of monarchy itself. A barren queen was a national crisis. A prolific one was the guardian of a lineage. Motherhood was thus weaponized politically, whether through accusations of infertility, suspicions of illegitimacy, or the triumph of producing heirs who embodied the future of the nation. Patronage, culture, and representation form yet another vital dimension of queenship. Queens were cultural icons whose tastes, styles, and artistic commissions left indelible marks on the national heritage. They influenced architecture, fashion, music, and literature, not merely as passive figures, but as active patrons. Elizabeth I's court was a golden age of English drama, with William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe among her subjects. Her portraits, carefully curated and filled with allegorical meaning, helped craft a mythology around her rule. Later queens continued this tradition. Queen Anne's reign saw the rise of Baroque architecture and the establishment of institutions like the Royal Society, signaling the monarchy's support for science and intellectual life. Queen Victoria's patronage of the arts coincided with a flourishing of literature, painting, and music, an age in which the monarch was both subject and supporter of cultural output. Queens also shaped the aesthetics of monarchy through fashion and symbolism. From Mary I's somber Spanish-influenced dress to Elizabeth I's dazzling ruffs and pearls, visual representation was a form of political messaging. In the modern era, queens have had to navigate mass media and visual culture. Queen Elizabeth II's carefully managed public image, stoic, composed, modern yet traditional, was maintained through photography, television, and ceremonial performance. The cultural image of the Queen became a carefully curated symbol of continuity, dignity, and national identity. Even in controversy, representation remained vital. The scrutiny and sympathy surrounding Diana, Princess of Wales, and later, the evolving public image of Camilla, Queen consort to Charles III, show how queenship continues to be shaped as much by perception and media as by constitutional role. Throughout British history, queens have played multifaceted roles that both reinforced and reshaped the monarchy. They have been political players, religious leaders, symbols of romance and scandal, bearers of dynastic legacy, and cultural icons. Their lives have unfolded on a public stage where personal choices reverberated across empires and centuries. From the medieval courts of Eleanor of Aquitaine to the televised coronations and marriages of modern monarchs, queens have both reflected and influenced the changing values of the society around them. Their legacies endure not simply because they wore crowns, but because they carried the weight of a nation's identity, hope, and continuity. They were expected to be everything at once: powerful yet obedient, pious yet politically savvy, maternal yet regal, public figures with intensely private burdens. In fulfilling or resisting those expectations, they left legacies that continue to inform debates about gender, authority, and tradition in the modern monarchy. Each queen contributed her own chapter to the long and evolving story of the British crown, making the institution not merely a relic of history but a living reflection of its nation's deepest contradictions and aspirations. Across centuries, England's queens have revealed as much about the nation's history as its kings. Their lives and reigns illuminate the shifting structures of power, belief, identity, and representation that have shaped England and, later, Britain. From medieval consorts navigating dynastic politics to reigning queens who held sovereignty in their own right, these women have played essential roles in defining what the monarchy is and what it means to be British. Their presence in the historical record shows how queenship has been both a source of continuity and a mirror of change. In times of religious crisis, queens were expected to symbolize faith and constancy. In eras of war or political instability, they became emblems of resilience or, in some cases, targets of blame. When the throne needed heirs, they bore the weight of national expectation as mothers. When culture and courtly life flourished, they became patrons, muses, and icons. Through it all, they lived under scrutiny, their public and private selves constantly judged, admired, or condemned. The legacy of England's queens continues to shape the modern monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II exemplified the transformation of the crown into a largely symbolic institution that nonetheless held immense cultural power. Her ability to embody stability across decades of social upheaval gave the monarchy a relevance rooted not in governance, but in tradition, service, and image. In her, the centuries-long journey of queenship reached a modern apogee, one where ceremonial authority replaced absolute power and quiet dignity came to define leadership. As the monarchy moves forward, the role of queens is evolving yet again. Camilla, queen consort to Charles III, represents a shift in public attitudes toward royal spouses, especially in how personal histories and past controversies are reconciled with modern expectations of representation. The monarchy is slowly adapting to a world of transparency, inclusivity, and change. Looking ahead, the idea of a future queen regnant, such as Princess Charlotte, carries symbolic weight. She may one day inherit a crown shaped by generations of women whose authority was once questioned or limited by gender, but who found ways to lead, inspire, and influence. Her potential reign would unfold in a very different world, one more attuned to equality, diversity, and individual agency. Still, she would carry the same historical burdens and expectations that every queen before her has faced. The story of queens in English history is not simply one of titles and ceremonies. It is a narrative of endurance, transformation, and the human costs of public duty. These women, whether celebrated or controversial, traditional or trailblazing, have all contributed to a living institution that reflects the values, contradictions, and aspirations of its time. In understanding their stories, we better understand not only monarchy but also the nation itself, its fears and hopes, its traditions and innovations, and its ongoing negotiation between past and future.